Welcome everyone to this inquiry into green health and wellbeing. Um, my name's Kevin Frediani, and I'm the curator of plants and gardens at the University of Dundee. And in that role, I meet some amazing people. And what I want to do today is not only invite them into your rooms wherever you are in the world, but also invite you into their minds as we try to unlock what green health and well-being is in their worlds and collectively, because I share a common interest with all of them, but it's a different facet of um, this area into my mind as well. So I'm going to start by just explaining that we've got Green Health and Wellbeing Week coming up on the 8th of May. It's not just in Dundee, but my focus is on Dundee because Viola, who I'll get to introduce herself in a minute, asked me to participate. And the idea behind this is it's going to launch the week for us in the Botanic Gardens and for everyone else. So we've come together to have a conversation. I hope you're all sitting comfortably because the conversation's an hour long. But we're going to look at what green health and wellbeing is, what it means to us personally and professionally, and we're going to explore that through a series of structured questions. So first of all, I'm going to go around my window and ask people to introduce themselves, say who they are, where they are, and how they are, because it's important to check in, isn't it, with all of this COVID going on and everything. So if I start in my top left with Mary, can I ask you, Mary, just to unmute and say who, where, and how you are?
Hi, thanks very much, Kevin, for this opportunity. So I'm Marie Beresford-Day. I'm a tutor at the University of Dundee, primarily teaching educational leadership. I also have a background in natural sciences as part of my undergrad degree. So I'm trying to merge the two together now as a researcher and bring together as natural sciences, ecology and educational leadership. So which is my connection with Kevin. At the moment, I'm at home in the beautiful Angus Glens, well, just on the edge of that. So typically I have a backdrop behind me of the Angus Hills, but I've gone a little bit more formal today. So how am I? I'm very well, thank you. The sun is shining, the skies are blue, and I know I'm going to get out for a walk at the end of the day in some beautiful part of the world.
That's wonderful. Well, welcome, Mary. Amanda, you're next on my screen going across. So can I get you to do the same? Unmute and say hello.
Sure. So I'm Amanda Kilroy and I am in Exeter today, a beautiful day in Exeter in Devon. I'm Chief Executive of something called CoLab Exeter, which is a multi-agency space. We've got about 35 different organisations and projects all working together here to support people who've got complex lives and lots of difficult situations going on. And today I'm feeling really good. It's my birthday on Wednesday, and so I'm looking forward to getting out onto the moor and enjoying the space.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amanda, and welcome. Exeter must be sunshine, I think, coming through your window. It's certainly like that up here in Angus. So the next up my screen is Sarah. And Sarah, you're in Fife, aren't you? But I'll say no more. Could you unlock yourself and say who, where, and how you are?
Hi, hello. I'm Sarah Derrick, and my role is Head of Learning at Dundee Contemporary Arts. So my background is working in museums and galleries since I was a student in Exeter. And I've worked in local authority museums and nationals like the Tate and Hayward in London, where there's very limited access to public space from my point of view where I was living. And I've now been up in Scotland for 20 years, working in Dundee and loving it, but I've always lived down by Leven in Fife because I am an outdoor girl and I have to have half my time being outside, surrounded by greenery or watery. And in terms of how I'm feeling, I'm slightly disorientated because we're in the move from being remote to opening our building. So I've started going back into our building, which is very exciting, but also very strange when there's only 2 people. So we're on a countdown, and a week on Wednesday, we'll be welcoming people back into our galleries.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, Sarah. I'm going to now flip around. I keep going around the clock I've got on my screen. So I've got Kenton next, if you'd like to unmute and say hello.
Hello, I'm Kenton Rogers, co-founder and CEO of Treeconomics, and that was set up in 2011. It's an employee-owned social enterprise, and essentially we do projects, collaborate on projects with others, local authorities, researchers, businesses, to look at highlighting the value of trees. And so my background originally is in forestry, and then I started doing more tree surgery and arboriculture, trees on development. And I got really frustrated and bored with the way that trees were always looked at in the context of hazard and risk. And I was completing tree surveys on development sites, advocating for the tree to be retained and for the, well, as per the British standard, you know, the trees should inform design, not the other way around. Completing these reports, and then some months later finding that none of it had been followed. The tree was gone, and there was a load of buildings up. So it was great to be able to embark really on a project, and now a social enterprise that, yeah, turns it on its head, looks at trees as being assets rather than liabilities. And we're based in Exeter, although I'm working from home at the moment in mid Devon in Winkley, and on the whole I'm feeling pretty good, but I cannot wait to get back and work with the team in a real space, at least a couple of days a week. I don't think we'll actually go back to full-time office working post-COVID, but certainly we all would like to catch up and get some real time with each other a couple of times a week. Thanks.
That's wonderful. And Kenton, my walking circle with you would be a rowing circle in a canoe. We share an interest in canoes. So next round I've got Rebecca. So in terms of just that circle, if you could unmute, and again, it's you know my list by now.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thanks for inviting me, and it's really nice to meet the other people on the call. So my name's Rebecca Wade. I'm a senior lecturer in environmental science at Abertay University. My work focuses on ecosystem services, so those are the benefits that people get from the natural environment. And through that interest, I've been working on sustainable water management in urban settings, on river restoration in rural and urban settings, and generally on blue and green infrastructure, you know, wide sort of definition of blue and green infrastructure, and thinking not just about how we can get biophysical function by restoring those kind of environments, but how they interact with society. Not so much the economic side, but what we do generally find when we work across all of those different disciplines is that as we restore natural processes and functions, we get biodiversity benefit, we get flood reduction benefit, we get drought reduction benefit, and we also get the benefit to human health and well-being and to the economy. So it's really nice working in that area of ecosystem services, because it's about bringing all of those different benefits under an umbrella and thinking about them not just in silos of single disciplines, but thinking about the multiple benefits that we can get. So I teach at Abertay University on the Environmental Science and Technology degree, which I'm the programme leader for, and also the Civil and Environmental Engineering programme. So although I'm not an engineer, I have a lot of interaction with our civil and environmental engineers, and also with the Institution of Civil Engineers, because I'm really concerned that the effort that I put into preparing the next generation of civil engineers to be more environmental is welcomed when they get into the workplace and they have got, you know, a profession that is ready to take that knowledge base and their enthusiasm on board. So really trying to work hard, not just within the university and not just through public engagement and outreach, but also with those professional organisations to make sure that across all of the board, we're sort of working in the right direction. Because let's face it, we have to do that pretty rapidly, don't we? So So my background is in blue and green infrastructure. That's who I am, and I'm an academic. Where I am is in Broughty Ferry, just to the east of Dundee. And how am I? I'm pretty good, especially being on this call with all of you, and especially since from the 1st of January I've started wild swimming in the Tay. So I am immersing myself in very cold blue environments and actually feeling a whole lot of wonderful as a result of that. So in addition to walking almost every day and cycling and enjoying my active travel, I also have been taking a frosty dip and feeling the benefit of it as well.
That's lovely. Thank you, Rebecca, and welcome from your dip today into the hot house here with us. And this could be in my tropical house, couldn't it? What a lovely dinner that would be. It'd be a salad, actually, then, wouldn't it? But I'm going to now come round to Viola, and sorry, you're last but not least, because you're the one who sowed the seed of the idea for me. So Viola, can I get you to introduce who, where, and yeah, how you are today?
Thank you, Kevin. So my name is Viola Marks and I'm Dundee's Green Health Partnership Coordinator. My background is actually in psychology, so I have a PhD in psychology. My interest has always been health developmental psychology, so I started up exploring fetal behaviour, but really with the idea that I'm interested in what makes us humans healthy, what gives us the best start, what keeps us healthy. And I'm that academic who left academia, so to say, because I think there is so much fantastic research out there and it needs applied. So I'm really passionate about human health and nature and the connectedness and physical activity and just how all of that makes us human and gives us the best possible life. So interacting with the environment in any kind of way, and that's really what I'm doing as Green Health Partnership Coordinator, where I'm lucky to work with so many, we call them nature-based interventions. So they're essentially third sector-led activities that happen outdoors. It can be a yoga in the park, it can be a cycling, it can be a health walk. There's so much happening, and it's about how can I raise awareness of these activities, how can I get more people involved, how can I remind people to get off the couch and get outside and do that daily walk. I'm pleased to say during COVID more people have done it, and it's probably been super beneficial to them. And yeah, so that's who I am. Where am I? I'm currently in Blairgowrie, but I live in Dundee and here as well. And I'm doing fine. I'm currently surrounded by trees, so that's really nice. And if you see me peeking out the window, that's usually why, because there's a bird coming by and I get distracted. And yeah, I'm just really stressed coordinating Green Health Week and getting that all up and running and dancing and cycling and rolling. So yeah, thank you all for being here and for helping me make a start with that.
Wonderful. Viola, thank you as well for sharing there. I think it's really important to notice that, you know, Viola, in terms of that, leadership is a difficult place, isn't it? In terms of being at the front of things, as Rebecca was talking about, trying to influence, or Amanda, I know in her work where she's trying to support people who maybe have fallen off the edge, maybe are in an interface, or even are unsure about reaching out to offer help that they've got, but they just don't feel confident that it's going to be received. All of these things are important ways of you guys doing your work to make the world a better place. And I thought what I do next is share with you a concept of green health and well-being that I put together. So I'm going to put it into the post there, but I'll read it out to you because I thought it's unfair me asking you what it means to you without me sharing my thoughts on that. So there isn't a standard definition out there, which is interesting because it's a relatively new discipline. So I've taken a little bit of inspiration from things like BREEAM standards and my environmental management training in the past and concepts of sustainable development. And I've come up with this phrase, which says green or sustainable healthcare is the practice of designing, constructing, operating, maintaining, and removing obstacles to health and well-being in ways that sustainably use natural resources and circular thinking to regenerate social and ecosystems. Okay, It's a big chunk there, but we're gonna play around that, because what I'm going to go into now is my directed questions. And although I started last with Viola, I'm actually now going to start first with you, if that's all right. I'm going to ask you a question which relates to let's open up and tell us something more about Green Health and Wellbeing Week. I mean, could you explain what it is, not just to this group, but also to those that are going to be watching it at the launch? So that would be really helpful.
Okay, so Green Health Week is led by Nature Scotch, so they're the government's nature body and the funders of the Green Health Partnerships. So there's 4 Green Health Partnerships, and our collective aim is to increase awareness of the health benefits, so physical, mental and social well-being of accessing the outdoors. So when I talk about accessing the outdoors or green spaces, that really means anything that gets you outside. So we're not talking about that run in the park where you need to get all sweaty. We're simply talking about going outside, getting some fresh air, going for a walk, sitting on a bench, looking at wildlife, using your bicycle to commute and get that fresh air rather than your car. You can do, of course, you can do sports, but you don't have to. So it's outdoor learning as well, recreation, play, all those things fall under green health, so anything that happens outdoors. And it's about getting people to start doing that more, start exploring different ways that they can do it. And really during Green Health Week, we work together in Dundee, so all the partners, and I have over 22 bodies involved at the moment. They're all putting on online activities because we're still restricted by COVID. So there's online activities people can join where they can do stuff live, where they can watch webinars, where they can get information. We've put together activity packs. So for example, with the Dundee Science Centre, there will be green health packs that get people involved into herb making and so on. But we'll also have activity packs for families that are online and self-led. So outdoor play and other things are featured in there. And then there are plant sales and plant swaps and bookable events. So physical distancing and capacities all adhered to, where we can do an architecture walk at the riverside and just kind of showcasing all the different things that we have. So I'm actually proud to say we have over 50 different activities happening throughout those 10 days, I think it is. Yeah, so we'll be super busy and hopefully, you know, many people can benefit. There's also one, I think, really exciting event that involves food. So a Flammkuchen event, outdoors, eating and dining. And I do think that that's a positive that we're now doing more of the outdoor eating and drinking and cafes and all of that. So yeah, that's Green Health Week. So anything that can get people outside and get them inspired to get involved.
That's wonderful. I can see with 50 different events and coordinating all those 20 groups, I can see why you might be a little bit stressed, but I'm sure those who actually benefit from it will be really pleased. So in advance, can I just say thank you for all the effort you're putting in. Kenton, I'm going to turn to you now, because obviously you're somebody who's working in that sort of profession, if you like, of trying to make green spaces better places. So I just thought I'd pick your brains about how human health and well-being is improved by access to nearby green spaces. If you could give me your thoughts on that, I'd be really grateful.
Sure, yeah. It's knowing where to start, because it improves it in so many different ways. Both our physical comfort, so for example with lowering urban heat island effect, so you know, and that's you know, up to 7 degrees Celsius. Trees and green space can be shown to lower that temperature on peak summer days, which is considerable. And thinking about the heat wave that there was in Europe in 2003, I mean, that unfortunately sort of killed 14,000 people in France, that heat wave. And I remember it because I was there in 2003 and it was really uncomfortably hot. So there's that direct physical effect, I suppose, of temperature, but not only that, sort of removing pollution and particulates from the air as well. So trees and hedges and other elements of green walls, they'll all trap particulates on their surfaces, on the leaf surfaces and the bark. And of course, if that doesn't get filtered, it ends up in our lungs, causing cardiovascular problems and things. So there's that effect. But then also with regards to like the mental health and well-being, I mean, that's more subtle, and probably the facts are harder to come by, the hard facts. You can look at relationships and things. So looking at statistics, you can see how where you've got better green space, there's generally better, even things like education, GCSE results can be looked at with using Office of National Statistics. And although that doesn't prove causation, there's definitely a relationship there. And it extends beyond that to things like crime as well. Although poor quality green space can sort of make people feel at more risk, and that there is more crime because it's unkempt. You know, there's part of us that does sort of can find that threatening or scary. You know, trees and park spaces at night time. So that needs to be borne in mind as well. But in our towns and cities, I mean, that's where most people live. That's where already in the UK, it's around 80%, I think, of people live in towns and cities. And globally, that's projected to rise to over 50% by 2050. No, it's already just gone over the tipping point of 50%, but it's projected to rise even further to 70% by 2050. And in the UK, we're already at 80 and over. So, you know, the green spaces and trees in our towns and cities, that's where they're going to have the most benefit, just simply because that's where more of us live. Yeah, so there's lots of different ways in which trees and green space can improve our health and well-being, physically and mentally. And I guess stepping back, looking at that bigger picture, we haven't been urbanized very long as a society as well. So you think how long we've been on the planet for, and for how long we've been out on the prairie or on the plains, hunter-gathering, and then you know, the amount of space we've spent, the amount of time, we've spent in urbanized spaces has been so short and built up so quickly that we've not really done ourselves any favors as a society in building nice places to live. I think we've forgotten that in the rush to make money, I guess. And yeah, it's come at the expense of green space.
Thank you, Kenton. That's really nice in terms of bringing those threads in. I mentioned at the beginning that I'd love to do a walking circle with you, and that's come from work I'm doing, which shows that in 1750, rural people in Angus, which was 95% of the people in Angus, only ever experienced a day walk of 5 to 8 miles. That was their daily. In fact, that was their life was spent within those 5 to 8 miles, and then within 3, 4, 5 generations, that all became urban and reversed completely. So these concepts are really important for people to understand. You know, it's a stressed environment. It's stressed for plants. It's stressed for people. And actually, that gives me a really nice segue to Amanda, because Amanda, I was just going to ask you. You're actually at the coalface of dealing with actually some of that stress in the human social system. And I just wondered, you know, how is that for you at the moment? What are you finding? And you know, not just from the symptoms of it, but actually from the real the real depth of feeling that people are experiencing, because we don't get, you know, I don't get to feel that in my life.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing to say that I've noticed is that we've been working the whole time. So listening to you kind of coming back after long breaks from, you know, being at home, and in a way, I'm not that I want to have that experience, but I've not had that experience. A lot of my team have not had that experience. We've been operational the whole time through. And it's interesting because if I could say experience anything, I feel like almost spiritually, even certainly in myself, I feel like every moisture has been dried out. You know, it feels like the whole system is very dry, is very brittle. Mental health is completely fragile. Lots of the systems that were expected to be able to support people were either not there, or they failed, or they worked very differently. So it's been interesting to see how people responded to that, and how on a personal level as a leader, how you hold space for people to have what is essentially a collective trauma experience. And I think this year has been that. It has been, we've been through and are still in the midst of and emerging from a trauma experience. And it's just recognising that that is kind of what is going on for a lot of people, and that's affecting them in different ways. So if you're somebody who doesn't have a home, if you're somebody who doesn't have a family, or even a network of people or a place to go to that sustains you, then a lot of the ecosystem that is available to most of us is not only not there, but it's also even more fragile and maybe remote than it was before. And so not only have we been trying to support that, but we've been trying to do so in a way that is responsive and not what we've seen actually from a lot of colleagues, which is just to bring in these very harsh and control the situation solutions. And it often feels like that's not what is necessary. So I think the other thing I would say about that is, for me personally, and standing in this space, and there's about 150 people that usually work here from all the different agencies, is there's sort of a tangible and an intangible element of it, so that you can kind of draw from and see that you draw from. So very physically, there are the things that you do. It's kind of making sure that people can get into the garden, even can go into green spaces, because all of us, what has sustained us has been the time we've been able to get out into nature. And I think for so many people that has become not a nice to have now. They've realised that that is actually essential to survival in all sorts of ways and in all sorts of levels. So I think there's that element of it. And then I think there's something Joanna Macy talks about, which is the greening of the self. And there is that sort of aspect where we've all been experiencing ourselves and feeling that almost ecological element of our own beings, and just how that whole structure that sustains us, how we maintain a sense of being that inner greening as well as going into spaces. So for me, a green week isn't just about going and doing something that, you know, might be like activity or even doing something together. It's also thinking about your own inner ecology and thinking about the ecology of family and the ecology of community. And so a lot of what we've been looking at organisationally has been about the ecology of our people and using the space to do that. And on a personal level, I've just started an apprenticeship on Dartmoor with someone who has spent a lot of years working with ceremony and the land, and just sort of really looking at the cues from the land about how we reconnect to our own deeper roots. And really this year has just made me need and want that more than ever. So I guess it is those two things. It's the very real and the very kind of graphic, in a way, things that we are very much confronted with, but also something else that we've all had to cultivate. And I'm going to say it almost like an inner landscape, where we've had to go inside and rely on ourselves a lot more and draw from that. And it's, you know, people reading poetry, reading books in a way that's connected to this. You know, it's all about that ecology. So I do think there's the real side, the real two sides of this. And probably the last thing I'll say is, if you're thinking about permaculture, for example, if you look at the social permaculture, that talks a lot about how our human ecosystem interfaces and works with the natural ecosystem. And we're sort of in a position now where I think we're all a lot more in awe of that, and bring a lot more humility to looking at that balance. And although it's a difficult place to be, it also feels like a very honest and quite profound place to be. So I don't know if that's the answer you were expecting, but that's kind of the mix of it at the moment.
Amanda, I never know what to say, what you're going to say, but I'm always inspired by it. So thank you for sharing. And I think you, again, really nicely feed into some of the work that I know Rebecca's been doing, actually with some of your students, I believe. But some of the research has been around, during COVID, how have people been using green spaces and experiencing that? And so I know I could have asked the same question as I asked Kenton, but this time I'm going to ask you about that work, because it's very fresh, it's very real. I think it is something that is touching all of us, because we're all feeling that. Even though I've worked in the green spaces, pretty well all my adult life, it's something that I know is around me and in every conversation I'm having. So, what's the evidence for that?
Oh, thanks for asking, Kevin. And I'm really excited to share some hot off the presses results, preliminary results from some of my students at Abertay University. So these are final year environmental science and technology students who are doing their honours project research on the green spaces in Dundee. And they're looking at them from lots of different aspects. And I'm going to focus on two of them in answering your question. So one of them has been looking specifically on how access to green spaces in Dundee before COVID and then during COVID, so in 2019 compared to 2020, might have changed in terms of the influence on their mental health. And the other student's been looking at some data which was kindly shared by Viola and the Green Health Partnership on the green health prescriptions that have been issued in Dundee and the areas in which they've been issued as compared to the amount of green space that's available in those areas, and also the index of multiple deprivation for those areas as well. And then comparing them as well with the reasons for the prescription. So in some cases, we've got an indication of whether it's in relation to mental health and well-being in that perspective, or if it's in relation to physical health. And sometimes it's not disclosed, but a lot of the time we've got an indication whether it's physical health or mental health. So from John Glassey's work, so John's also got a first degree in psychology and is now doing a degree in environmental science. And he was really interested to use his understanding of, surveying the public and also doing statistical analysis, as well as his love of nature and spending time in nature to look at this mental health and green space connection. And we've got some really nice results, and they are preliminary. But they show that already in Dundee before COVID, people were using the green space a lot. So people were already accessing nature. Now there's 360 responses to his survey, which is a really nice number. Over just a couple of weeks, he was able to collect 360 responses. We had our council leader, John Alexander, sort of reshared it on his own social media. So there was great support across, as well as Viola and Kevin and many others who reshared the link to the survey. So we found that people already said that being in green space meant that they had a better mood, that they felt more calm and relaxed, and that it reduced their stress. Now, this was true for all genders and all genders and all ages, everything that we had the criteria for. But we can say with significance that this improved during COVID. So there's a statistically significant improvement, even though the green space was already being used, the importance of green space and the use of green space for mental health and well-being increased. Now, I think the 360 is obviously a small percentage of Dundee's population, but it's a really good sample size, especially when we've got results from across all wards of the city. So it represents all of the region that we're in, and it represents different age groups and, male and female, or people maybe chose not to disclose their gender, but so that's good. So really good news for Dundee that people were already using green space, because what we know from the literature is sometimes people that choose to access nature will then go to that resource as something that they know benefits them. And it's the people who aren't already accessing nature that can sometimes be more of a barrier to getting those benefits. So it's really good news for Dundee that people were already accessing their local green space, and that they found that to be a really helpful sort of resilience and lifeline during COVID. So there are some other links that I can share with you that, a significant number of people said that they visited green space more often. So since the pandemic, their use of the green space had increased, and also for all of Dundee, across all of the wards and all of the ages, they felt that the benefit, the majority strongly agreed that they had an enhanced benefit to the mental health. So I can see that Viola's really interested in this, because I haven't even shared this data with her yet. It literally is hot off the presses. I got an update from my students this morning. So I'm really happy to share that. And the good news, Viola, and well, especially Viola, but for everyone, is that we'll get more detailed resolution of that data to help us understand, the different parts of the city. Now, referring to Daisy Buse-Evans' work, she's been looking at where the green health prescriptions, those nature-based interventions, have been coming in. And just following up from Viola, they've been prescribed by 3 GP practices. So we've got 3 GPs practices in Dundee that have been prescribing them, but also community prescribers. So there have been people that are working in and amongst the community, out with the GP practices, who may or may not be medical professionals, but are certainly kind of frontline. And they've also been able to prescribe these prescriptions. So what we've found is that there is a slightly higher number of prescriptions being issued in the wards where the GP practices are most local, but actually they've been prescribed across the whole of the city. All of the wards have got green prescriptions. And in this case, I think we analysed 386 different green health prescriptions over the last year or two that we've got data for. So there were some wards that had higher numbers of prescriptions, and also a trend is coming out that the lower the SIMD, the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, so the more deprived an area is, the more prescriptions are being issued. And within those more deprived areas, women have been receiving a larger number of prescriptions than men. So we can see that there's a need for prescriptions. We can see that there's a particular need in the most deprived areas. And we can see that there's some breakdown of who's receiving those prescriptions. And of course, that's what the data tells us, but that also raises lots of more questions. So are men seeking medical interventions as often as women? And is that why there's a discrepancy there? Perhaps they also need those nature-based interventions, but are perhaps not seeking assistance with any issues that we have. We did, however, find that men's prescriptions where they were issued were more for mental health, whereas for women it was for physical health. So we're beginning to be able to break down the findings of these results from the database that Viola and her team have kept, which has been absolutely vital. And that's why Viola's working with universities and with students and all sorts of things, so that together we can really make the most of this Green Health Partnership and try and break down that information. Because I know one of your questions coming up is that, how do we take this forward? What lessons have we learned? And maybe I'll save some of that input until you get to that question later.
Yeah, no, I think there's just an interesting discussion going on there. I'll just share that with the group, because an interesting insight. It's always nice when you get fresh research come back and give you insights into what's going on in a place that you know. But Amanda was asking if people can access this activity if it hasn't been prescribed, and Viola just said yes, it's open to be self referrals. There's also interactions, like we work with there's a group called Hope in Dundee, which is an old people's group, and they reached out to us and said, would I engage with these people who are really struggling to come out into community and offer them a safe place to go to. So what we've done is we've got a private, if you like, private ticket to the Botanic Garden, which is just for them. They can access it online through their own special link, and they can come with somebody else to support them in their visit. Their first time out in 18 months, these people. So those type of things, and I've got to find a way to record that and make sure that goes back to Viola, because I know she'll want the data on that one. Okay, well, that's wonderful. Again, I'm gonna let you ask some of these questions a bit later on, but I want to now move on to Sarah, because Sarah works in the cultural and arts sector, which is an area that's also associated with some of these designed and undesigned green spaces, the interstitial spaces that we find between our buildings. But I just wondered, Sarah, you know, in terms of looking at the impact that COVID has had on live and performing arts and culture, the industry, the blow that is actually taken. So there's something about the individuals who are involved in that community within Dundee and around across Scotland, the UK, the breadth of life that they usually bring to community and sense of taking people someplace else within their own heads or bodily experiences somehow being switched off. How has that impacted in COVID, and how might it be incorporated back into these outdoor spaces as an early intervention?
Well, thank you, Kevin, for asking me a really huge question. That I frankly, I'm not going to attempt to answer that in detail, because I simply don't have the research about the impacts and the impact on people, audiences in general. Dundee Contemporary Arts obviously has a very sort of loyal local, national and international audience as well. And we have lots of anecdotal sort of stories about people saying, please, when are you opening? Can you not just open now? I'm missing you so much. Our cinema audience are desperate to get back in. And I suppose the best thing for me to do is to speak from my own experience on the learning team, where we work with different community partners, different groups. And a good example would be the work we've been doing with the International Women's Centre. I've been funded by the People's Postcode Lottery, so I've been able to carry on working through COVID with these groups of women and their families. And obviously for them, that sense of isolation, stuck in the flat, stuck in the house, away from everybody, away from family, away from extended family, and not being able to carry on their normal activities, whether it be with us at DCA or in the centre with their bread making and their cooking, that kind of thing, their language courses. And I really liked what was mentioned earlier on about that collective trauma. And I think that's a really good way to think about it, that audiences are people, and people, we are all coming through this collective trauma. And I think it's really interesting for me in that I work in spaces, gallery spaces, that are designed to be large, airy, special, different, non-stigmatized spaces, very like public spaces, but they are inside a building. And we're going through COVID, where even today with my team, I've been going, what are the rules for being inside? How many people is it inside? Because we can now move to 6 in a group outside from 6 different households, which means we can get community of activity and that lovely feel going. But indoors we can't. And yeah, in my head, our gallery spaces are very similar to, outdoor spaces like Botanics. And in fact, over the years, we've done a lot of work with Dundee Botanics and Baxter Park to actually work between indoor and outdoor spaces with artists and artistic practice. So I guess we will find out when we open our doors next week if there's a mad rush, desperate people banging on the door to come back in and have these very personal experiences and shared experiences. It's an interesting thing that people need to sort of feed their soul and feed that inner landscape that you were talking about, Amanda. That's a really good description. But the thing that they are missing is the doing it together. Daisy Fancourt at University College London, her piece of research that she did through the BBC, actually, 50,000 people responded to what was called the Great Creativity Test. And from the data gathered from various quite lengthy surveys, a lot of folk responded, and they found that shared cultural experiences can do very particular things to you in terms of psychosocial behaviour and your inner self, raise self-esteem, create space in your mind where you can then become more resilient to be able to deal with challenge. And her papers are fantastic for me because that's evidencing what we do. We see it every day and we know it. I don't have the evidence as such. I'm not an academic, although at DCA we are working all the time with universities, and we have PhD students coming through to evidence these things that are so hard to pin down. And I think in the same way that public spaces and green spaces will be vital for people to build their confidence. This moving from being you're not allowed out to you can go out for an hour to you can go out for an hour and meet one other person from another household. So now you can meet 6 people from another household. There are people that there's going to be a big lag where people are still like, I don't know if I want to meet 6 people. I don't know if that's safe. I don't know if I want to go to a pub. Should I be wearing a mask? Should I not wear? These very confusing messages. So this sort of stepped return to our mad society as it was before, we don't know how long that's going to. And so Gary's and green spaces can offer a sort of helping hand along that way and to build that confidence. So, for example, our current exhibition that's been sat in a gallery, fully formed, ready to go, by an artist called Emma Talbot, who's from Birmingham. She's created this whole exhibition from her lockdown experience way back early 2020, and she's got beautiful paintings on silk about her inner landscape. She's sharing her thoughts and feelings about where she is, and she talks about trauma. And in her beautiful paintings on the silk and lovely little fabric sculptures that she has, she is representing herself, thinking about things, feeling things, trying to get it her in. And she's talking about things like the role of keening, women who are paid to cry and mourn the loss of, well, individuals at funerals. But her exhibition is very much about mourning the loss of something, we're not quite sure what. And she's returned very much to the landscape. The patterns and shapes in her paintings are from our landscape. Trees feature hugely. Trees are there in her work. And she talks about how the landscape carries the mark and the history of everything that's gone before. And we're just a little speck on the top. So the landscape has all the understanding and nature has all the understanding of how to cope and get through it, because that's what it's done in a sort of cyclical way over millions of years. But we're not at that level yet. So that feeding the inner landscape and creating an inner space, or whether it's an outer space. So we will be working with Botanics again, because her work is so much informed by nature, patterns and structures in nature, hidden or unseen, that can help us, as Amanda, you were saying, rebuild that sort of society, that connection. I was thinking about mycelium actually the other day, and how that connects and feeds and supports, and that's what we kind of need. We need some kind of cultural mycelium, but I guess that's what culture is. Culture is the mycelium for our society. So there you are. I'm onto mushrooms now.
And that's what a wonderful metaphor you share there. And I think there's something in that thread of that golden thread you are weaving for us, which takes us from the inner landscape of the individual, which we're all too familiar with, to this refinding other and a sense of community. Because I think part of what's been lost is that sense of community and that sense of comfort, being safe within a community of other, which is which leads me really nicely to Mary, because Mary's work is around evolving work is around leadership. That's an interest for her, in terms of that was her PhD research, but it's in pedagogy. So it's about training our future leaders. And I just thought, in amongst all this mix with green health and well-being, and if you reflect on what's been shared with us today, how do you think leaders of the future can learn from the benefits of this experience and from aspects of green health and well-being? Another big question.
It is a big question. I mean, leadership is a huge area in itself. At the moment, we've got the well-being element, which is huge, the environmental aspects, which is huge. So it's trying to pull all of these together. And I think for me, I kind of, from a PhD, drew from the work of OBN and colleagues, and she's done a couple of papers, and continuing that work and taking that forward into trying to pull together leadership in terms of ecology and sustainability. And for complexity theory, we draw from the natural sciences. That's where it originated from. So all focuses on things like connections, relationships, that interdisciplinary element, that so many terms that we've heard in this discussion today really do come out of complexity theory. what OBN does is she translates that into complexity leadership theory, where she pulls together those components and how can we use the natural sciences in terms of humans and leadership within that. So they've identified 3 strands within that theory. One of those being that we are kind of governed within this, shall we say, I'll be kind and say frames of reference, but we title those as constraints, such as legislations and policies and things like that. And if we think about that in terms of the environment, then, you know, our species are governed by what's available to them at that point, the survival and so on. And then at the other side, well, I say other side, it's not a continuum, but it's a relationship. But I suppose on the flip side of that is this autonomy, the adaptability, the flexibility. And again, we see that so very much in terms of nature, and things happen suddenly, and how do they, you know, did these species adapt? And that's similar to what we're saying within organizations and leadership and humans and things like that. How do we adapt to that? And over the past year in COVID-19, we've seen an awful lot of adaptations taking place at all levels. And I think that's where my argument comes from. Yes, we may have these formal leaders, but actually we're all leaders in some form or another. And I think for me, it's important that we get that message out. We all have to take some responsibility, not just for our environment, for the loved ones around us and so on, but for ourselves as well, that internal responsibility, as well as accepting the help and the support from others. But now, how do we balance those out? And OBN come back to this, the enabling leadership, a term that they use. And again, it comes back to space. And I think I've heard every single speaker here today mention the word space in some way or another. And that's very much about, that's how we enable people to do what they need to do for their own well-being, but also for their environmental well-being within the constraints that we all have. And how do we do that? Through that communicating with each other, developing those networks, connections. I suppose coming back to what Kevin's just said there about building community, but also how do we have time away from that? How do we have that time to switch off, to reflect, to move away from some of that noise that we also need, to be able to think about things and digest things. So it really is having that balance, and I think that's where this notion of enabling leadership comes from. And then what I'm trying to do is sort of build another layer around that, and that focuses on the legacy. What legacies are we leaving behind as individuals? What legacies is our environment having in terms of us as individuals? You're probably aware from this conversation that I'm still trying to piece all of this together. And there's still a lot of work to do, but I think we need to be thinking about, in terms of nature, and how we can draw from that. And certainly from my own work, is to be patient and persistent, and certainly I see that coming through in nature. Making sure that we appreciate those smaller contributions. Everything doesn't have to be this rapid change that is at this high level. It's all those smaller contributions that we make, but also the smaller contributions that our environment makes to us as well. And that giving back, you know, we take a lot from the environment, and we hear just how wonderful nature is for us as individuals, but equally, what can we do for nature as well? So it's how do we balance that out too. That's my bit.
Mary, you've taken me around the circle. So we're back to the beginning, and so I'd pick up on some of those threads, because you talked about being leaders together, and I think that reflection that all individuals can lead themselves and make a difference. In fact, I can't remember who said it, but it is only the individual that makes a difference. History tells us when you go back, it's that person who steps out, that first step to make a difference is the one that we all then follow. And we need leaders and we need followers. And there's something happening with COVID that is allowing us to reflect on the type of world that we want beyond this, how we want to form relationships within community and with our green, blue, and built environments, as we realize that increasingly it's less about the money and the wealth and the status. It's more about our inner landscape and our healthy relationship with the outer landscape. And what I want to do is end this formal aspect of the discussion by thanking you all for contributing towards understanding different aspects of green health and well-being as we lead up to the Green Health and Wellbeing Week. And Viola wouldn't allow me to finish without saying it starts on the 8th, and look out for those 50 activities going in and around Dundee and wider afield. But do join us as we step out, enjoy nature, refresh our inner landscape, and at the same time work out how we can collectively make a difference. So thank you very much for your contributions. I feel truly blessed.